My beloved child. Before you decide this message isn't meant for you, let one quiet thought settle where your worries usually speak the loudest. What if the words you've been longing to hear have been waiting for the exact moment your heart became ready to receive them? Not yesterday. Not tomorrow. Now. There is a letter that has never been folded into paper, never sealed inside an envelope, yet it has traveled farther than any handwritten message ever could. It has crossed sleepless nights, silent prayers, unanswered questions, and moments when hope felt too fragile to carry another day. Its first sentence is simple. Please open this before I give up. At first, those words sound like desperation. But listen carefully. They are not asking you to rescue someone. They are asking you to understand someone before silence becomes the only language left between two hearts. That changes everything. Somewhere beyond everything you can currently explain, a soul has been carrying conversations that never reached your ears. They rehearsed honesty more times than they could count, only to watch courage disappear each time the moment arrived. Not because they stopped caring. Because caring became too deep to express carelessly. You have probably noticed how certain memories refuse to disappear. A face returning without invitation. A laugh remembered during an ordinary afternoon. A feeling that appears for no obvious reason while the world around you remains completely unchanged. Most people dismiss moments like these. But what if they are not interruptions? What if they are invitations to notice what the heart recognizes long before the mind is willing to admit it? That question has been waiting much longer than you realize. There was a season when this person believed silence was kindness. If I stay quiet, they told themselves, perhaps life will become easier for both of us. So they smiled when they wanted to speak. They walked away when they wanted to stay. They convinced themselves that protecting someone else's peace mattered more than revealing their own truth. From the outside, everything looked perfectly ordinary. Inside, entire oceans remained unmoved because every wave had been taught to turn back before reaching the shore. Even now, they wonder whether that choice created distance, or simply delayed a conversation that destiny never intended to disappear. The answer isn't as obvious as it seems. Perhaps you've experienced something similar without giving it a name. A strange calm arriving in the middle of chaos. A moment when your heart suddenly slowed, as though listening for something your ears could not hear. Or maybe you've caught yourself thinking about someone at the exact moment you promised yourself you had already moved forward. Coincidence? Memory? Hope? No one can answer that for another person. Yet some questions are valuable precisely because they remain unanswered just long enough to change us. And one of those questions is quietly waiting for you now. The sentence hidden inside the title has never meant what most people assume. I can't do this anymore. It was never about giving up on love. It was never about abandoning hope. It was about surrendering exhaustion. About finally becoming too tired to keep pretending that silence feels safer than honesty. There comes a point when hiding emotions demands more strength than expressing them. That moment arrives softly. Not with loud arguments. Not with dramatic endings. It arrives like dawn. The sky changes long before anyone notices the light. Imagine an old bridge stretching across a quiet river before sunrise. For years it has carried footsteps in both directions. Some travelers crossed without ever looking down. Others paused for only a second before continuing toward somewhere else. But one person stopped. They rested their hand against the weathered railing and whispered words no one else could hear. I hope they understand someday. The river carried those words away. Or so it seemed. Because some prayers are never lost. They simply travel where timing can finally welcome them. That is why this message feels strangely familiar. As though part of you has been expecting it without realizing it. The person behind these unspoken feelings has changed in ways neither of you could have predicted. Time did not erase their emotions. It refined them. The need to be understood slowly became more important than the need to be right. The desire to protect appearances gave way to something quieter. Authenticity. And authenticity asks very little. Only that truth no longer be hidden behind comfortable silence. Still, one memory continues returning with remarkable clarity. Not a dramatic farewell. Not an unforgettable confession. Just one small act of kindness you may have forgotten almost as quickly as it happened. They never did. To you, it was ordinary. To them, it became the reason they kept believing genuine hearts still exist. The remarkable part is not the memory itself. It's what happened because of it. And that changes the meaning of everything you've heard so far. Because the next truth isn't about what they finally found the courage to say. It's about the unexpected reason they almost chose never to say it at all. There was no single moment that made them step back. It happened quietly. Like autumn leaves falling one at a time until the branches suddenly looked different. No arguments echoed through the silence. No dramatic goodbye demanded attention. Instead, they slowly convinced themselves that perhaps their presence had become a burden rather than a blessing. And once that thought found a place to live inside their heart, every unanswered moment seemed to confirm it. That is the danger of fear. It has a way of turning silence into stories that were never true. Yet even then, something refused to disappear. Not certainty. Not expectation. Just a gentle feeling that one conversation still belonged to the future. Have you ever noticed how the strongest bridges are built long before anyone chooses to cross them? Stone by stone. Day after day. Almost unnoticed. Meaningful connections often grow the same way. They are not held together by constant words. They are strengthened by quiet moments that neither person fully understands until much later. Looking back, they began seeing little pieces they had overlooked. A conversation that lasted only minutes but lingered for years. A glance that carried more comfort than an entire evening of explanations. A simple goodbye that somehow never felt complete. Those fragments seemed insignificant at the time. Now they fit together like pieces of a picture that had been patiently waiting for enough light. There were evenings when they almost decided to let everything become a memory. They would tell themselves, maybe this is where the story ends. For a little while, that thought felt reasonable. Peaceful, even. But every attempt to close that chapter uncovered another page they had never truly read. Not because the past demanded to be repeated. Because it still had something to teach. The heart has a remarkable way of recognizing unfinished understanding. It doesn't shout. It simply returns, gently, until we are willing to see what was hidden beneath the surface all along. The words, "Please open this before I give up," carried another meaning that remained invisible for far too long. It was never asking someone to rescue a broken heart. It was asking for one chance. One honest moment. Before assumptions became permanent. There is an enormous difference between being rejected and never being understood. Many people spend years healing from things that could have been transformed by a single truthful conversation. Not because every story receives the ending it hopes for, but because honesty allows every heart to leave with peace instead of questions. That realization became impossible for them to ignore. Picture a lighthouse standing alone beside the sea. Storm after storm arrives. The waves crash against the rocks. The wind changes direction. Yet the lighthouse never chases the ships. It simply continues shining. Not to control where anyone goes. Only to make sure no traveler mistakes darkness for the absence of light. That is how they finally understood love. Not as possession. Not as certainty. But as quiet faithfulness to what is true. Perhaps caring has never been about holding someone tightly. Perhaps it has always been about remaining genuine, even when outcomes remain unwritten. That thought brought more freedom than they expected. Something else began changing inside them. They stopped asking, "What if I lose them?" Instead, another question quietly appeared. What kind of person do I become if fear continues making every important decision for me? Everything shifted after that. Because courage rarely arrives as confidence. More often, it arrives while our hands are still trembling. It speaks before certainty catches up. And somehow, those moments often become the ones we remember for the rest of our lives. Meanwhile, without realizing it, your own journey had been changing too. The disappointments that once hardened your heart had slowly begun teaching compassion. The unanswered seasons had cultivated patience. Even the moments that felt like detours quietly prepared you to recognize sincerity in ways your younger self never could. Growth rarely announces itself while it is happening. Only later do we notice that our responses have become softer. Our perspective wider. Our heart steadier. Perhaps that is why these words reach differently now than they would have before. Some messages are not delayed because they were forgotten. They wait because the listener is still becoming the person capable of hearing them. Then came the realization they had avoided for the longest time. If they remained silent forever, you would never truly know why. Not because you refused to listen. Because they never opened the door. That truth hurt. But strangely, it also healed something. For the first time, they understood that vulnerability is not measured by whether someone accepts your honesty. It is measured by your willingness to stop hiding from it yourself. That realization became the turning point. Not the ending. The beginning. If they could sit across from you now, there would be no rehearsed speeches. No carefully memorized explanations. Only a quiet smile. Then perhaps these simple words. I don't expect yesterday to return. I don't expect perfection. I only hope that whatever happens next begins with truth instead of silence. Sometimes the most powerful sentences are the ones that no longer need decoration. Their strength comes from their sincerity. And sincerity has a way of reaching places that polished words never can. Yet one memory still remains untouched. It is the only piece they have never shared with anyone. Oddly enough, it was not born during a joyful moment. It appeared on an ordinary day that seemed completely forgettable. Nothing extraordinary happened. No promises were made. No lives changed overnight. And still, that single ordinary moment quietly became the reason they finally believed your paths were connected by something deeper than coincidence. Why that memory still holds such extraordinary power. And why they have protected it until now. Is the truth waiting just beyond this moment? That ordinary day began like countless others. Nothing in the sky hinted that it would become unforgettable. The streets carried the same rhythm. The hours passed without asking anyone to pay attention. If someone had looked from the outside, they would have seen nothing worth remembering. Yet the heart keeps records the eyes often overlook. And that is exactly where this story quietly changed direction. The moment itself lasted only seconds. You offered kindness without realizing anyone needed it. Perhaps it was a patient reply. Perhaps it was the way you listened instead of rushing to speak. Perhaps it was simply your willingness to make another person feel seen when the rest of the world seemed too busy to notice. You probably walked away believing it was an ordinary interaction. They walked away carrying something entirely different. Hope. Not loud hope. Not dramatic hope. The quiet kind that asks for nothing and expects even less. The kind that survives because it was never built on fantasy. It was built on a single glimpse of genuine humanity. For a long time, they questioned whether they had imagined its importance. Maybe it only mattered to me. That thought returned again and again. It arrived during peaceful mornings. It lingered beside evening windows. It followed them through conversations that never quite reached the places they truly wanted to go. Still, every attempt to dismiss that memory somehow made it shine even brighter. Isn't it remarkable how certain moments become clearer with time instead of fading? Most memories lose their edges. Some become softer. Others disappear altogether. But the meaningful ones, they quietly gather strength. Almost as if they are waiting for the day someone finally understands why they remained. Life has an unusual way of preparing two hearts separately before allowing either one to recognize what has been happening. While they were learning courage, you were learning discernment. While they were discovering honesty, you were discovering peace that no longer depended on having every answer. Neither journey looked impressive while it was unfolding. Growth rarely does. Seeds never announce themselves beneath the soil. Yet one morning, the earth looks different. Not because change happened overnight. Because it had been happening all along. Perhaps the same is true of the soul. The deepest transformations often arrive in complete silence. There was another truth they had never dared to face. They realized they had spent so much time worrying about saying the wrong thing, that they almost never said the right thing at all. How many beautiful conversations have been lost to perfect timing? How many sincere words remained imprisoned because fear insisted they needed one more day? One better opportunity. One clearer sign? Eventually they understood something that changed everything. The perfect moment does not appear first. Honesty creates it. That realization felt both humbling and freeing. It removed every excuse that hesitation had carefully built over the years. Imagine standing beside a quiet lake before sunrise. The water is so still it reflects every color beginning to touch the sky. If you throw even the smallest stone into its surface, gentle circles begin spreading outward. One ripple becomes another. Then another. Until the entire reflection has changed. Truth often moves the same way. It begins with one honest sentence. One courageous step. One decision to stop hiding. From there, everything else begins moving in ways that could never have been forced. Not because life suddenly becomes easier, but because authenticity has its own quiet momentum. There is something they wish they had understood much earlier. Love is not sustained by grand declarations alone. It grows through consistency. Through listening when it would be easier to defend yourself. Through choosing understanding before assumption. Through allowing another person to be fully human instead of expecting them to be endlessly perfect. That lesson cost them years to learn. Yet they would not erase those years now. Because wisdom often arrives wearing the clothes of disappointment. Only later do we recognize the gift hidden inside the struggle. Perhaps this message has begun stirring questions inside you as well. Not only about another person, but about yourself. Are there words you've postponed because tomorrow always seemed more convenient? Is there forgiveness waiting behind pride? Is there gratitude you've quietly carried without ever speaking aloud? Sometimes the heart isn't asking us to solve every mystery. Sometimes it simply asks us to become a little more truthful than we were yesterday. That single step can change an entire story. The sentence that once echoed with exhaustion has transformed completely. I can't do this anymore. Now it means something entirely different. I can't keep pretending that silence is safer than sincerity. I can't continue hiding behind fear when honesty has already found its voice. Those words no longer sound like surrender. They sound like freedom. And freedom has a remarkable way of arriving softly. It rarely announces itself. It simply appears the moment we stop carrying what was never ours to hold forever. Still, one final piece has remained carefully protected. Not because it is painful. Because it is precious. There was a promise quietly made, not aloud, not written, not spoken where anyone else could hear. A promise formed in the stillness of one unforgettable evening. If the opportunity ever returns, they whispered within themselves, I will meet it with truth instead of fear. They never told another soul those words. Until now. Yet they still do not know whether that opportunity has already arrived. Or whether this very moment is gently becoming it. And the answer to that question may reshape everything that follows. A promise made in silence has a curious way of changing the person who makes it. No one applauds it. No one witnesses it. The world continues turning as though nothing has happened. Yet beneath the surface, something begins to shift. Not all at once. More like the slow turning of a compass that has finally found true north. From that evening forward, they noticed life differently. The things that once demanded attention suddenly seemed smaller. The things they had overlooked became impossible to ignore. And among those quiet discoveries, one truth returned again and again. The heart grows weary not from loving too deeply, but from carrying too many unspoken words. There was a time when they believed honesty required certainty. They waited until every doubt disappeared. Until every question had an answer. Until every possible outcome felt safe. That day never came. Instead, life offered a gentler lesson. The most meaningful conversations are rarely born from certainty. They are born from trust. Trust that truth is worth speaking even when the ending remains unwritten. Trust that sincerity has value even if it is not immediately understood. That realization did not erase their fear. It simply stopped allowing fear to lead. And sometimes, that is the bravest change a person can make. If you were able to step into their memories for only a moment, you might expect to find dramatic scenes. Instead, you would discover something surprisingly ordinary. A quiet afternoon. A shared laugh. A pause that lasted only a heartbeat longer than expected. Nothing extraordinary happened. Yet something invisible settled into place. Not because either of you declared its importance. But because the soul has a language that rarely asks permission before remembering. Years may pass. Cities may change. People may become almost unrecognizable from who they once were. Still, certain moments remain untouched by time. Not because they refuse to let go. Because they were never meant to be forgotten. There is another misunderstanding they quietly carried for far too long. They assumed that being vulnerable meant risking rejection. Now they understand something entirely different. The greatest risk was never rejection. It was allowing fear to write a story that truth never had the chance to tell. How many lives are shaped by conversations that never happen? How many misunderstandings become permanent simply because neither heart knew how to take the first step? Those questions lingered with them. Not as regrets. As invitations. Invitations to become the kind of person who no longer lets silence make every important decision. Imagine an old garden after a long winter. For months, everything appears still. The branches seem empty. The ground looks lifeless. Someone passing by might believe nothing beautiful remains. Then, almost unnoticed, the smallest green shoot breaks through the earth. It doesn't arrive with noise. It doesn't ask for recognition. It simply grows because its season has finally come. Hope often works the same way. It returns quietly. Not to erase the winter. But to remind us that winter was never the whole story. That realization became a shelter for them. Whenever doubt returned, they remembered that growth is often invisible until the very moment it can no longer be hidden. Perhaps you have sensed something similar in your own life. A feeling that certain chapters are asking to be understood rather than escaped. Moments you once wished had never happened now revealing lessons you could not have learned any other way. It is a strange kind of peace. Not because every wound has disappeared. Because every wound has begun teaching something greater than pain. Wisdom rarely arrives wearing the face we expect. More often, it comes disguised as patience, as humility, as the quiet decision to remain open, even after disappointment tried to convince us otherwise. The letter you have been opening one thought at a time has never been about persuading you. Its purpose is gentler than that. It exists because truth deserves to be spoken before time quietly carries another opportunity away. No pressure. No demands. Only honesty standing where fear once stood. There is remarkable freedom in that. When expectations loosen their grip, sincerity finally has room to breathe. And sincerity asks for very little. Only to be received with the same kindness in which it was offered. Then another realization arrived. One they never expected. They discovered that forgiveness is not always about another person. Sometimes it is about releasing the version of ourselves that believed we had already missed every meaningful chance. For years, they carried the weight of too late. Too late to explain. Too late to apologize. Too late to tell the truth. Until one quiet morning, a different thought appeared. What if kindness is never late when it is genuine? They could not prove that thought. They simply chose to live as though it were true. Everything inside them became lighter after that. Now the words from the beginning have changed once again. Please open this before I give up. They are no longer a plea. They have become an invitation. An invitation to choose understanding over assumption. Presence over pride. Truth over endless hesitation. Perhaps that has been the hidden message all along. Not that every story ends the way we imagine. But that every heart deserves the dignity of honesty before the page is turned. And yet, there is one final truth they have protected until this very moment. It has nothing to do with the past. It is about a choice waiting in the present. A choice neither of you can make for the other. Only for yourselves. Because the next chapter is no longer asking what was lost. It is asking what becomes possible when two hearts stop hiding from the truth they have both been quietly learning. And that answer begins with a single decision, one neither of you realized had already started to unfold.